Question 3, we're looking at Appendix A and Working Paper A5, and now the valuation of trade receivables. Okay, so I think standardly, let's go and get those general and analytical procedures out the way, and then you can go into your appendix in the working paper to see if there's anything else relevant for you to then be able to develop the test of detail. Question 3, general procedures. I'm going to say, agree the debtor's ledger balance to the general ledger trial balance and annual financial statements debtors balance at year end. Agree the opening balance in the debtors ledger to the closing balance in the prior year audited financial statements. Cast and recalculate the debtors ledger or list. You could have asked them for a list too. Scan the debtors ledger or list or age analysis for unusual items like credits or long outstanding debtors. Obtain a management representation letter for the valuation of debtors. Consider the effectiveness of internal controls over debtors and the impact on the substantive testing. I'm not going to forget that one anymore. Then we've got to do analytical procedures. So some examples of analytical procedures I can say, I would actually put this as my heading. Perform the following analytical procedures to test the reasonableness of debtors. Compare the prior year balance to the current year balance. Then I don't have to say why I'm doing it because I've already put the point above. I'm doing this for reasonableness. So I can say compare credit sales as a percentage of debtors in the prior year to the current year. I can say compare the allowance for credit losses in the prior year to the current year. I can do some industry comparison. To the market debtors. Just to get an understanding, are debtors really struggling to settle? Because debtors are dealerships. Are they really struggling to settle? I can do some ratios. So do compare debtors days in the prior year to the current year to see that the current year is worse, because we expect it to be worse because of the poor motoring industry as a result of COVID. Okay, so I've put a few more there because I'm trying to show that it's not just prior to current year, it's not just debtors. I can do markets, I can do ratios. Okay, now I need to get into the detail. So now I'm going to the question. So I'm back into Appendix A, and initially I'd question marked what about Mozambique customers, but I know that it's not applicable now because they do not sell on credit to them. Okay, they have to pay in order for an advert to be shown. So what I've got here is that total trade receivables is up, and I understand the allowance for credit losses. So this is going to be important to help me test the allowance. Okay, so I've said here the simple method, because there's no significant financing components, they use the provision matrix as their practical expedient. So I'm going to have to test all of my understanding of IFRS 9 when testing the allowance for credit losses. Do also remember that this is an estimate. So I have got some standard procedures I can perform for an estimate as well. When I move into the working paper, there was nothing more here that's really going to help me with auditing the debtors. So I'm now going to go into the gross and auditing the allowance. So for my gross, I normally just do the audit of the recon, the debtors ledger to the general ledger. But I've done that as part of my general procedures. I've gone and got the closing balance, I've got the opening balance, I've matched them to the general ledger, so there's no need for me to redo a recon. So all I'm going to do is test some of the debtors' closing balances by looking at what it's made up of. So I'm going to select a sample of debtors from the debtors ledger or the age analysis, and I'm going to agree to the invoice, the sales invoice. Test the details of that invoice, guys. So agree the price to the price list, because it all depends on what type of data we're looking at here. So we've got to make sure it's the correct pricing for that data. I'm going to cast the invoice. I'm going to recalculate that if it is a local, which it has to be because I only have local debtors. And I can go and test that it has been aged correctly based on the dates of the invoice. That's how I can test my sales for my gross receivable. The rest of my work is going to come from the allowance for credit losses. So first and foremost, when I am looking at an allowance or an estimate, I need to understand how they calculate this. So I'm going to inquire from management as to the policy for calculating the allowance. Then I want to make sure it's consistent, because they didn't say that they changed it. So I'm just going to test consistency by comparing it to the prior year. Compare the policy in the current year to the previous year to ensure that it is consistent. Because if it isn't the same, you can't just use the comparison of this year to last year to see if it's reasonable at any point, because it would have changed. So then I need to make sure it's authorized and be aware that there has been a change. They haven't changed, so I want to make sure that it is still the same. Then I need to make sure that it is reasonable. So I'm going to say compare the policy to the market or the industry norm policy to ensure that it is reasonable. And a further way to test something like an allowance for credit losses to see if it's reasonable, I can compare the actual bad debts written off in the current year to the allowance in the prior year. Now I need to get into the detail. They say that they have used, well, we say they've used the simple method because there is no financing element. But I know what that means now, guys. It means that there has to be a lifetime expected credit loss recognized. And how do they go about determining it? They need to look at a default rate. The default rate should be based on the historical credit losses, so it should be based on what we just said here. The actual in the following year compared to what they had created in the prior year as an allowance. But it needs to be adjusted for the forward-looking information. So I need to go and test that they have used the simplified approach. And then what categories have they grouped their debtors into in order to use that provision matrix so that it's grouped like debtors with like, and then use that same provision matrix for those like debtors. So I'm going to say obtain the calculation for the allowance for credit losses from management, and first of all inspect that they have used the simplified method and explain, because there's no financing components. Then I want to inspect the grouping of their debtors to ensure that they are similar. Because that's what they then apply the same kind of matrix or percentage to those debtors based on their expected or historical credit losses, and then adjusting those forward. Then I'm going to say test the default rate for each of the different categories. So how am I going to do that? First of all, I want to make sure that it was based on historical credit loss experience. So they must show you that. And then I want to see that it was adjusted for forward looking information. And then I can just recalculate the rate itself. In terms of the historical credit loss experience, we have tested that up here. So now I just want to test that forward-looking information so I can inquire with management. to develop that factor. Okay, and potentially I want to compare that default rate to industry rates to see that it is reasonable. Or I could say everything about the default rate, the forward-looking, the historical. Okay, then I can recalculate the allowance. Because initially I just recalculated that default rate, but then I want to then go and apply those default rates to their different aged categories or groups of debtors to determine that it was calculated correctly. And then maybe I want to just test the aging of debtors themselves. So I can say select a sample of debtors in the different categories. And trace it to the invoice to ensure that they've been aged correctly. Guys, I just want to take you to valuation, where we did substantive procedures so that you can see how all of this is relevant to those standard procedures we had for valuation. So first of all, there were your general procedures. Then you go down to valuation, because we were only doing valuation. The gross amount is a recon, but we said we've already done the recon when we looked at our general procedures. So other than that, we can test the cost by agreeing to invoice or contracts, which is what we did. For the contra asset, the negative, the allowance for credit losses, I say go to ISA 540 procedures. And there they are. First, what is the policy we asked for? We test its consistency and its reasonability by first comparing it to the industry norm for reasonable, by comparing it to the prior year for consistency. Agree all components of the calculation to supporting documents. And that's now when we said go and test the default rates, because this is the calculation. Go and test the historical data. Go and test the grouping. Go and test the future info that they use to adjust it. Okay, because that's the components of the calculation for the allowance. Then you recalculate it yourself. Okay, we can't use an expert here because this is an accounting calculation, and so you don't use an expert when it's accounting related. Okay, and potentially considering whether there's subsequent events that could have been added. Okay, so all I've done is I've used those procedures, but I have to adjust the components for the calculation have to be dependent on what is used for an estimate. In this estimate, because they've used IFRS 9, I have to consider all those avenues that make up the calculation for that expected credit loss lifetime of the debtor. Go back and look at IFRS 9 if you're uncomfortable with these procedures, because they are just the procedures that need to be performed based on your accounting standard. Let's go back to the required to make sure you've addressed everything before we move on. In terms of the required, we've done general, we've done analytical, so we've done opening and closing, we've tested some sales. We didn't really test receipts and credits, but you can go and select a sample and test those too. And then in terms of my allowance, we've done the policy, we've done consistency, we've done reasonableness, and we've tested the detail. More than enough for 25 marks. Okay, question 4.